The West Australian Parliament has agreed to make a formal apology to the family of Roebourne teenager John Pat, who died in police custody in 1983. John Pat's brutal death, along with many others, became a cause celebre, leading in the end to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. WA Deputy Opposition Leader Ben Wyatt put forward a motion for an apology on Wednesday, which was unanimously supported by the House. The next step is for the apology to be formalised and given, possibly opening a window for legal action by the victim's family. Meanwhile, protests commemorating John Pat's death will be held around the country tomorrow, starting at midday in Sydney, Melbourne, even on Grand Final Day, Cairns and Adelaide. And after putting forward the motion for an apology in WA yesterday, Ben Wyatt says he believes things have improved since the death of John Pat.
The relationship between Aboriginal people and police has fundamentally changed since the death of John Pat. Certainly, I'm not saying it's a perfect relationship, and the number of Aboriginal people who still end up in jail shows that there are issues to be resolved still. But certainly now, when I move around Western Australia, one of the things I always do is go and visit the police in remote communities or regional centres, and the police that I speak to have a much more respectful relationship with Aboriginal people, much more aware of cultural obligations, but also much more aware of that very often cruel history between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. So things have changed fundamentally. It's never always perfect, that's the reality, but certainly it's changed a lot.
The Social Justice Commissioner Mick Gooder has a very different view. He says despite the years that have passed since the death in custody of John Pat, very little has changed. He's told the Awaken program that more needs to be done, particularly in keeping Aboriginal people out of jail.
Well, when you look at the 22 odd years we've had since the Royal Commission, which was basically brought about in a big way by the death of that young fella. We've got more people in jail, we've got a great increase in incarceration of kids. Our women are going to jail in the highest rate we've ever seen. I'd say in the 22 years we've done nothing, we've learnt nothing from that death.
And yet the recommendation of the Royal Commission was about reducing incarceration rates, wasn't it? That was the prime recommendation.
Absolutely. Aboriginal people were dying at a greater rate in prison because we were imprisoned at a greater rate, and the whole focus of the report was reducing incarceration rates. And with these increases we've seen over the 22 years, I think you'd have to give this a failure. It's been one big failure, and I think the incarceration rates they're seeing really dishonour the memory of this young fella that died in such tragic circumstances at the hands of the police in Roebourne.
One of the recommendations from the Royal Commission was an improvement in community liaison to improve the relationship between the police and Indigenous communities. Do you find that's happened, or is there still a lot of suspicion and mistrust?
Look, funny enough, when we did raise that issue in Roebourne, there was a general feeling of that the police there were some really good police there, people who'd worked in communities, that knew how communities work. It was really what I'd probably think about as a community policing model rather than a criminal policing model. So the people we met with were fairly happy to endorse some of the, and I actually try to make a practice of bringing police commissioners and say, look, there's some good feedback here at a couple of people here. There's some problems as well, but so I think what we need to do is say, take those two young coppers from Roebourne and say, how can we put the same attitude across the system? Because I think that's the problem. We have some really good people, but then we have some people who are sort of living back in the days when this thing happened to John Pat.